All right, everyone, welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today, we are going to be trying to tackle a question about figuring out just when exactly Hajj becomes like a must-do,
Yeah.
like when you absolutely have to go.
Yeah.
So our listener wrote in, and they've got like 13,000 pounds saved up, which is amazing. But they've also got this 30,000 pound mortgage hanging over their head.
Okay.
And to make things even more interesting, the husband has savings, but isn't planning on doing Hajj anytime soon, and no one else in the family can really afford it. So it really begs the question, does our listener have to go right now? Like, what's the deal?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think you highlighted something really, really important, which is that it's not as simple as just, oh, I have the money, now I need to go for Hajj. So, in Islam, there are 5 conditions for Hajj to become obligatory, and you have to meet all 5 of these conditions.
Right.
So the first one is, being Muslim. The second one is being of sound mind. The third one is, being an adult. The fourth one is being free. And the fifth one, which is really the one that we're going to be focusing on today, is the ability to perform Hajj both financially and physically.
Gotcha. Okay, so it sounds like there's a lot more to it than just, having the cash on hand.
Yeah.
Right. So let's dig into that a little bit. What does Islam actually consider like being financially capable when it comes to Hajj?
Right. So that's where this concept of istita comes into play.
Yeah.
Istita, yeah. And you can kind of think of it like this, imagine you're packing your backpack
Right.
for this, epic journey
Yeah.
that is Hajj. So in that backpack, you need enough money to cover all of your Hajj expenses, right?
Yeah.
But you also need enough to make sure that your family is taken care of while you're gone, and that backpack can't be weighed down by, crushing debt that you're unable to handle.
Mhm.
So that's kind of istita in a nutshell.
So it's like this whole financial puzzle that we need to put together, right? We've got the savings, we've got the mortgage, the family's needs. How do we like take all these pieces and figure out, if our listener is actually good to go for Hajj?
Right. So let's try to break this down, piece by piece. So first we want to look at the mortgage, right? So if it's a manageable mortgage, meaning the payments aren't causing any hardship, you're not drowning in interest.
Yeah.
It might not necessarily be a deal breaker for Hajj. We're thinking about long-term reasonable installments. And then we have that 13,000 pounds in savings.
Right.
So let's say, for example, the Hajj trip itself cost about 5,000 pounds. And then you need another, say, 2,000 pounds to make sure that your family is taken care of while you're away. So if after those expenses, you're left with enough to comfortably, keep up with your mortgage payments and live your life, then, you might be in the clear. But that's something that you really want to, make sure that you're comfortable with.
Wow. I never really thought of it that way. Okay. So we've got that part figured out. But what about the husband in all of this,
Yeah.
right? Because he's got savings,
Yeah.
but he isn't planning on performing Hajj anytime soon.
Yeah.
So does that change things for our listener?
Yeah, absolutely. It does, because Islamically, it's a big deal to delay Hajj unnecessarily once you're obligated to go.
Right.
And so, the husband's reluctance to go, that actually adds a whole other layer of kind of, complexity to the situation. And so this is definitely a situation where it would be really beneficial to speak to a local scholar,
I see.
to kind of get their guidance on how to navigate this, especially because, maybe individually her finances aren't there yet, but
Okay.
maybe if they kind of, combine their finances, they can make it work, or
Yeah.
maybe there's some, considerations there. So it's really important to speak to someone who's knowledgeable.
That's a really interesting point. Like it almost makes me think that because he's not going, does that actually make her responsibility even greater?
Potentially. Yeah. And I think that speaks to something really important, which is, when we talk about Hajj, it's not always just about individual finances. It's about how those finances impact the family unit and how they can work together to fulfill, their religious obligations.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay, so I think we've covered a lot of ground here for our listener and really anyone else who's kind of struggling with this question. What's the biggest takeaway that we want people to leave with?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway is that, if you have manageable debt, like a long-term mortgage, and your savings can cover both your Hajj expenses and your family's needs, you might very well be obligated to perform Hajj even with that debt. But, as we've been talking about, there's a lot of nuances here. And so in situations like this, seeking guidance from a knowledgeable scholar is absolutely key.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for kind of walking us through all this intricate topic. I think it's so clear that, financial ability for Hajj is so much more layered than it might seem, at first glance.
Yeah.
So for all our listeners out there, here's a little something to think about. We've been talking about how it's important to get guidance from a scholar, right? But Islamic law can have different interpretations. So could the scholar you choose actually impact, your final decision on whether or not you're obligated to go? Definitely something to think about as you're continuing to do your research. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.
Sounds good.